Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Bennick. You know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the most talked about educational subject in our country in years is this whole topic of Common Core educational standards and all the issues surrounding this new nationwide attempt to revolutionize how our children are taught in our school systems. There literally has not been a single day that I can think of in months when Common Core has not been in the news. And there literally has not been a day when we have not heard of a new protest being mounted somewhere in the country against Common Core by parents, by educators, and by legislators in state after state after state. And we're seeing some of it in New Hampshire as well. Tell It Like It Is has already done 5 shows on Common Core, and today's 6th show will, I think, definitely be followed by more. I see this as a series that's going to be running for quite a while. Now, those of you who have watched the previous shows have heard expert after expert come in here and go down really into the weeds of Common Core to discuss its shortcomings, its unanswered questions, and the reasons why not just parents of kids right now in school systems, but basically all thinking people should be concerned about Common Core, and every paying taxpayer should be thinking about it as well. Now, on one of my shows, my guests were Bedford School Superintendent Tim Mays and Assistant Superintendent Chip McGee. And because much of the topics that we were covering were, I think, critical of Common Core, I did want them to come in, because here in Bedford, New Hampshire, Common Core is in the process of implementation. Now, the public posture of both Tim and Chip has been to not either publicly advocate or oppose Common Core, but to simply implement it because of the fact that New Hampshire has signed on to Common Core. But I want you to watch that show, because what you will hear throughout the show is me asking questions that they simply did not have the answers to. Why is that? Not because they're not paying attention. It's because nobody has answers to these questions, which is one of the major problems of Common Core. Yet the people of America and the people in New Hampshire are supposed to believe and accept that Common Core is the definitive panacea to all educational woes. And I find that absolutely amazing. My personal point of view, okay? Now, if you have not seen those previous 5 shows on Common Core that we did, I'd ask you to please watch them. Or even if you saw them, watch them again to refresh yourself on all that's going on around them. Can do it very easily. This show has a website, www.tellitlikeitisnh.com. You'll see a toolbar across the top of the page, the home page, and it will say, one of the things that it will say is issues. Click on that, and you'll have your choice of issues part 1, issues part 2. Click on part 2, there'll be a drop-down menu. One of the things on it is Common Core, and voila, those 5 shows will be there, as well as any future ones in today's. Now, within the past couple of weeks, you may have seen another show here on BCTV that was produced here in Bedford called Around Town, and that show also discussed Common Core. I'll tell you, when I heard about it, and when I heard its title that describes Common Core as advancing public education, I was intrigued. I thought that, well, maybe we were finally going to hear a substantive discussion on how Bedford, or how New Hampshire, was going to address the many concerns about Common Core participation and implementation here at home base, so to speak. So I made it a point to watch the show. I don't know if you saw it or not. Well, let me tell you, I was sorely disappointed with my expectations. The show guest was one Bill Duncan, who hails from, I think, the Portsmouth, New Hampshire area, and now is basically a self-appointed, and let me stress that, self-appointed expert on education. After retiring from a software company, Bill started a website on educational issues, and last year, I think is kind of the first time he publicly surfaced as a very, very loud opponent of a scholarship program that was going to be funded by private businesses to provide very modest scholarships to families who might have a child that was not flourishing in his or her local public school system. Now, the scholarship money could be used to help the parent pay tuition for another public school in a neighboring community, or for tuition at a charter school or a private school. Bill's most vehement comments seem to be related to the possibility of a child transferring to a religious-based school, and a religious-affiliated school, I should say. And because a business would receive a very modest tax break for donating to the scholarship program, it was his contention that tax dollars were being used to undermine public education. Whatever. Well, anyway, I searched high and low to learn if Bill Duncan had any background at all which would qualify him as an expert on educational issues, or if he had any public involvement by which he would have gained a body of knowledge on any aspect of education. Well, all I could find, and I'm a pretty good searcher on the internet, all I could find was that he unsuccessfully ran as a Democratic candidate for governor's council in 2012. Yet, now this self-appointed, repeat, self-appointed, educational expert is also now a self-appointed expert on Common Core and has the audacity to come to places like right here to publicly denigrate people who are internationally recognized for their work in education, for their achievements in education. Now, clearly understand this. Today's show was in the works long before this other show appeared on the air. And as I said, it's the 6th show of a very long, ongoing plan that we have to continue to talk about Common Core. But given some of Duncan's outrageous babble that was essentially supported by the show's host, we're going to discuss today some of the malarkey and misinformation that was propagated on that show. We'll discuss their theory that Common Core is an educational consensus developed and supported by teachers across the nation. We'll discuss the charge that opposition to Common Core is all about privatization. And arguments about U.S. education is an effort to, guess, wait until you hear this, shut down public schools to open charter schools. They said that on the show. We will discuss the charge that Professor James Milgram was outvoted on his criticisms of math standards while he sat on the Common Core Validation Committee by so-called math specialists. We'll discuss the show host's rather arrogant and demeaning description of Professor Milgram and Dr. Sandra Stotsky as traveling authorities on the Common Core opposition circuit. And we'll discuss Duncan's suggestion, and he said it, that Manchester Mayor Ted Gassis so approves Common Core that the city of Manchester is now reaffirming and enhancing Common Core in the city of Manchester school system. We'll discuss the comment that he finds it very odd that Dr. Sandra Stotsky finds fault with Common Core, particularly as it relates to literature. We'll discuss the statement that smarter balanced testing is dramatically improved testing. We'll discuss Mark Tucker, whom the show host suggested is the true educational expert on Common Core. And we'll discuss her statement that the Pioneer Institute is, quote, not interested in supporting public education, end quote. And his statement that they're only interested in charter schools and homeschooling. We shouldn't bother listening to them, I believe he said. We'll discuss their postulations that Common Core does not affect local control of education, that arguments against student data collection is only a battering ram, that the costs of Common Core are insignificant, just a few million or whatever in New Hampshire. We'll discuss, they say, that teachers won't be evaluated by how students do on Common Core testing. And what I really want to discuss are the very dismissive remarks, and I think a little insulting, that here in New Hampshire, the only people who question Common Core are those same folks who support school vouchers, homeschooling, and charter schools. Really? Well, you know what? This audience alone tells me that is a ridiculous statement to make. Now, I've got 3 guests with me here today, so this is going to be a very lively discussion. I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. And let's say this, not one of them could be called by anybody as a self-appointed educational expert. They are educational experts in many different areas. First one is Anne-Marie Bancroft, who is no stranger to tell it like it is. You've seen her before. She's the educational liaison for Cornerstone Policy Research, and in that role, she interacts with educational experts from throughout the United States. And she serves as a resource on educational issues for New Hampshire state legislators, for school boards in New Hampshire, and for parents' organizations throughout the state. On a personal level, she's been deeply involved in educational issues for well over 10 years and looks at the issues from not only the perspective of one with actual knowledge of those issues, but from the perspective of an involved parent, from the perspective of a conscientious taxpayer, and of a tutor of children who need assistance beyond what they're getting in their own classrooms. Imagine that. Here in Bedford, New Hampshire, where she lives with her family, she's well-known, a well-known figure at school board meetings and public deliberative sessions because she presses for answers on unanswered questions, and she's unafraid to raise concerns that should and need to be raised. This doesn't make her popular with some folks in town who embrace anything and everything associated with public education, regardless of its cost, regardless of legitimate opposition, and regardless of impact on the entire community. Those folks have often tried to dismiss her comments and questions as simply just another one of those folks who hates public education. Woo-hoo. But Anne-Marie presses on and is doing a heck of a job. Irs Scandal, who is sitting to my left, and I should have said Anne-Marie's to my immediate right. Sid has almost 56 years as a professional educator in his roles of teacher, school principal, college professor, writer, publisher, and co-founder of an educational think tank. Obviously not self-appointed expert. A prolific writer, Sid has received national recognition for his authorship of a wide variety of educational materials. His work on minority groups, which was written during the 1960s, was reviewed in the Scholastic Teacher as the most provocative teaching aid of the year. Sid wrote the first book on economics for middle school students, and he's also written and been widely published in the field of personalized literature-based reading. His work in economics education received the prestigious Freedom Foundation Honor Certificate Award, and in this past May at Temple University, he was honored as the recipient of the Helen Oaks Citizen Service to Education Award and delivered the Helen Oaks Lecture. Currently, he's a highly sought writer and commentator on the subject of Common Core standards. And finally, and I hope all of my guests are still awake after my alarm opening, John Dipietro is also with us, and he's a certified inbound marketing professional, the founder and principal of Domesticating IT, an inbound marketing blog and consultancy. He's the co-founder of CareerGravity.com, which is an educational website teaching online marketing. And he also is in demand nationwide as a speaker on internet marketing and on social media topics. He, too, is a book author, the author of Social Media for Engineers and Scientists. He holds leadership positions in the International Society of Automation, for which has received multiple professional awards, including the Emerging Leader Award. And he can also be heard on Rich Girard's show Girard at Large on WLMW 90.7 FM, yay Rich, where he is featured in regularly scheduled segments and discusses the methods by which people can themselves become more technologically savvy. He's been very deeply involved in the Manchester, New Hampshire public school system and has been an eloquent presenter at that city's school board meetings. As a matter of fact, those of you who have watched all of the shows on Common Core, or who will, I hope, on the website, will see a show titled More from the Experts on Common Core, in which Dr. Stander Stotsky and Jamie Gass were the guests. And at the beginning of that show, I opened it by reading the testimony that John gave before the Manchester School Board on Common Core and asked them to stop experimenting with his kids. You'll find it powerful. Okay, with all that, I think my guests are ready to rock and roll, and we got a lot of ground to cover, so who wants to jump in first, and which aspect do you want to go for first? Because you heard that there's a lot of it. None of this is new to any of you. The show that I talked about is not the first time we've heard the so-called proponents of Common Core use nonsense rather than substance to defend Common Core. So have at it. Who wants to go first? Where do you want to start?
Well, I would like to have you discuss the history, the genesis of the Common Core, where it comes from, how it came about, which is really critical, I think, to people understanding how they're being manipulated in this country by a Common Core. Mm-hmm. And if you would like, I'd give you a short history.
Absolutely.
I don't think I can do a short history, but
please
I can give you some. I think we all have to understand who's behind this and how this came about. This is a product of Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. And it came through, we say it's state-led. That is a phony kind of appellation for it at all, because it's not state-led at all. It's Gates-led, and it's Gates money that gave over $100 million, this foundation, to two organizations which fronted his new approach, his previous attempts at changing or modifying or improving, so to speak, education, public education, failed. So he enlisted the assistance of the National Governors Association, which is not an educational association, and then the Chief School Administrators, which again is not an educational association. They're both lobbying groups. They don't have any kind of educational foundation at all. They lobby for their particular interests that the people, the governors and the chief school administrators want. He gave these two groups $100 million more now to organize this curriculum. They gave it to an organization in Massachusetts called Achieve, who went ahead and put this ball game together. Now, if anybody is who knows about writing curriculum, knows that you can't write curriculum quickly. And Achieve managed to do this within a year.
That's all?
That's right.
For K through 12 curriculum.
That's right. So
wow.
They got it in 2008. They brought it out in 2009. That is a physical, academic, intellectual impossibility. You cannot do that. I've worked on many curriculums. You cannot do an honest job and have it intellectually appropriate for children and students in 1 year. Impossible. So what they do, they lifted a lot of things from other places. I have books, math books, that go back to the 19th century, and I can pick out things there that are more challenging than what they have or similar to what they picked out. So it's you know, they pick here, they cherry picked here, they may have added some new language, but it's not something that they have organized in such a way to say, this is the way to go. That's nonsense.
Well, we keep hearing that the standards are internationally benchmarked.
Well, what does that mean?
Exactly. And how have they been internationally benchmarked?
That is, you know, the Common Core is a movement. And the movement comes with a whole layers of propaganda. And the layers of propaganda are hidden behind lots of words. So internationally benchmarked. Somebody said, wow, that's internationally benchmarked. What does that mean? Parents don't go into school and say to the principal or the superintendent, tell me what the international benchmark is. How did they go about it? That's nonsense. You can't do that because every country is different. You know, we're compared very often to Finland on the international test. Well, you know, to us, Finland is Wisconsin. It's 5.5 million people. It's more homogeneous. It doesn't have the same kind of immigration problems that we have. That's an excellent point, because they did on that previous show that I talk about stuff like that. And that's an excellent point. Well, it's like comparing apples and oranges in reality. Well, they say Shanghai, you know, every time a PISA test comes out, just as it recently did,
Now, explain PISA so people will know.
That's the Program in International Student Achievement kind of thing. That's run by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Development.
And I believe they might have cited that as a superior report, did they not? Yes.
Well, it's a snapshot of 15-year-olds. They're 15-year-olds. When I was 15, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where I was going, basically. So you got this snapshot of 15-year-olds in this test, and we have, there's a lot of bad propaganda about that too, because if we were to desegregate our test scores in terms of economic differences, we would be at the top. But we haven't. But then I'll ask somebody, and I'll ask anybody here or anybody else. Everybody says, "Gee, we're not at the top." Well, we never were at the top.
Never?
We were never at the top. In all the history of testing, if people go back and look at the history of testing, the United States never did well on these international tests.
Really?
That's right. And you can, that's something you can look up, or anybody can look up.
But if you would listen to the Common Core advocates, you'd almost think that this was something in recent times.
That's nonsense. That's nonsense. The United States never did well. Nevertheless, we're still the country to go to in everything in the country. We're still the economic leaders. We still hold more patents in the United States than any 2 or 3 leading countries in the world. So this is a lot of propaganda that's being piled on one at the top of the other. I can continue to talk a lot about this, but I'm going to let somebody else get a chance.
Well, one of the things that Anne-Marie knows is we never have to stop talking. I mean, we can cover as much as we cover today and then reconvene and do another show, because this is a huge subject.
It is. Yeah.
It really is a huge subject.
This whole thing of governance with Gates and it's not being state-led, and the using of Arnie Duncan, who became the enforcer-in-chief of the Common Core.
Oh, that's the guy who made the little snide remark about Common Core opponents being just those suburban mums who were disappointed their children aren't geniuses or something to that effect.
This is a guy who couldn't teach in any public school in the United States because he couldn't qualify for a license.
Is that right?
That's right. So to say that he is qualified to tell somebody like me, because I've spent my time in the trenches, that this is the way you run a classroom and this is the way you run a school and this is what you teach children, is ludicrous.
He's a bureaucrat.
That's right. That's right. I think he's just feathering his own nest for the future, but that's the side. But to be led down the path with a man like this and a program like this is really doing a tremendous disservice not only to our kids, but to our country, to our democracy, which is slowly being eroded. And that is something that has to be discussed at length.
I agree with you.
The nature of how this is being chipped away at.
I agree with you. And we kind of got a little bit, we touched on the standards, and I know, all of you have positions on that, but I was kind of shocked to hear on that show criticism of James Milgram, who, to my knowledge, and please, jump in because you are much more cognizant of this than I am, supposedly is not enough of a mathematical expert, that his opinions were not shared by other people on the validation committee. And apparently they seem to have a problem with Dr. Sandra Stotsky, too, who I believe has written standards for all kinds of places, including the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which before Common Core was like right at the top of the educational spectrum, wasn't it?
Right. And Professor Milgram and Professor Stotsky were chosen by the Common Core initiative, the organization, because they are the renowned experts in the country. To even question their credentials, it's shocking and it's absurd.
Well, that's what I thought.
Absolutely absurd. Even the people who support Common Core nationally have really shied away from attacking their character and their credentials because it's an absurd kind of argument to make. So the few people who have done that, I think it speaks volumes for them. there's always going to be disagreement. There's going to be disagreement.
Of course.
But even within the people, like the mathematicians, for instance, that have looked at the Common Core standards, where are they publicly saying that Professor Milgram is wrong?
Mm-hmm. Well, wasn't he the only true mathematician
on the validation committee?
That's what
there
I thought.
were math educators.
Right.
And this is the problem that we get from a lot of kind of novices. You know, you brought it up earlier about Bill Duncan. And it even happened when Mark Tucker was here speaking on behalf of some of the legislators that invited him.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit, too.
They were not accurate in the description of what their credentials were. For instance, a mathematician is very different from a math educator. And that is not to I mean, I'm a math educator because I've tutored kids in math before.
Right.
But I would never, ever put myself in the same category as a mathematician. I don't have that expertise. I do not have the expertise of creating standards, as Professor Milgram has done in California and in the other states that he has worked with, states developing standards. So he has the credentials, he has the expertise in that subject. And to even question his credentials, because there are people, again, that support Common Core that would never go there, because they know that this is a person of integrity, this is a person that has the credentials and he has the expertise. Same with Professor Stotsky. They have the track record. That's why they were chosen.
Her biography goes for like 20 minutes, just saying what she has done.
You may look at the
standards.
It was interesting because I did watch the show, and there was consensus, I think, from Bill Duncan that you can work on these standards and make them better. Well, that's what everybody's saying. If there's something better out there, and we want something better, why is that a problem? Why is this?
Good point.
Why is this even debatable? This, as a parent, just as a parent, I always question, why are we debating? Why are we arguing against people who say, you know what, we've looked at the Common Core, we see that, you know, maybe for some states this is a step up, but there's something better out there. We all know it. There's consensus out there. The professor for the Fordham Foundation, Professor Stephen Wilson, who analyzed the Common Core standards against all the other states, has identified other states having better standards. So you even have the organization, the Fordham Foundation, who supports Common Core, who has acknowledged that there are better standards out there. And Mike Petrelli from the Fordham Foundation congratulated Manchester when Manchester decided that they were going to elevate their standard. Why is this a problem? Why doesn't anybody want to say, let's do something better? But, you know, back to Sid's point about how this has been developed and how this has been governed, I don't think anybody's opposed to having a set of standards. Your child should probably know this by the time they're done with first grade. I think, you know, just a basic set of knowledge. I think you can find that with core knowledge. Core knowledge just has scope and sequence. This is what your child should know at every level. Basic information. Obviously, all children will not reach that based on
any more than they all start walking at the same time or whatever.
So just, you know, a core knowledge of information that's out there. But the governance of how this came in and how this was developed and the coercion by the federal government to impose this on these schools right now and to impose this on states to, if you don't do this, you're not going to get your No Child Left Behind waiver. And if you don't do this, you may not qualify for Race to the Top grants. I mean, that's the kind of efforts from the federal government that has been also a big part of the problem. You know, we got a set of standards. We got a set of mediocre Common Core standards. School districts like Manchester and Alton have said, you know what, we've looked at them. Parents have come out and said, you know what, we want something better. They should be applauded. They should be applauded because now you've got local schools saying, you know what, we're going to look at our own standards. We want something better for our district. And unfortunately, I'm not sure they're going to be able to get away from the coercive efforts. But at the same time, that's a big problem, is just how this whole thing was implemented into our schools. This wasn't parents, teachers, and administrators sitting down saying, we've got to come up with a plan. We've got to make something better in our school district. That would be considered local effort. This was not state-led. This was not a state-led effort because When did you hear any politicians running for office supporting Common Core?
Most of the politicians in New Hampshire heard
Right.
about it recently.
Right.
Which
Right.
is why we saw some pure outright anger, which is why we saw consternation, which is why we saw a lot of them going, what in the hell is going on?
Yeah. And then you have parents like John, whose kids
Yep.
are subjected to what's going on in the schools, who was, you know, courageous enough to come out and speak out and say, stop using my kids as experiments. And this is what we're hearing from parents all over the country.
You know, let me ask John, one of the things that I mentioned in the opening was how there was a statement made by the self-appointed expert that he I guess had conversations somewhere along the line with Ted Gatzis, the mayor of Manchester, and that he liked Common Core, and they're reaffirming it in Manchester. Well, that's not what I read when I read the newspaper accounts, or what I heard when I listened to radio shows. You were there, you're in Manchester. Are they reaffirming and enhancing?
That remains to be seen, I suppose. You know, the proof will be in the pudding. Mayor Gatzis was a big advocate of Common Core. That's a fact.
At the outset?
At the outset, at the beginning,
But he didn't end a big fan, from what I could hear.
You know, as more and more experts, you know, not self-appointed experts, but real experts, as more and more parents came forward and voiced their concerns about it, he listened. Multiple members of the Manchester School Board listened.
Yes.
They asked questions and they became very concerned. Mayor Gatzis, I think that, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but
no, of course not.
From my point of view, it seemed to me, my observations, his point of view seemed to turn when he started asking this, questions to the State Department of Education that they couldn't
Was that the
answer.
hearing right here in Bedford?
Yeah.
Yes.
And he became deeply concerned at that point. And, you know, you mentioned earlier about, you know, some of the other shows and some of the other conversations. When you start asking deep questions, you get shrugged shoulders. That's when I personally became extremely concerned. You know, I think it's important to make a distinction. This is a complicated subject, right? And I think it's important to make a distinction between the standards and what's contained in the standards and the implementation of the standards. And that's one of the reasons it makes it really difficult to have a conversation with Common Core advocates, is it's kind of like a whack-a-mole game, because they keep bouncing back and forth, right? If you identify an issue with the implementation, they will go back and they will talk about the standards. And if you start talking about problems with the standards, they will start talking about implementation. And you can't, you know, it's very hard to have a conversation about one or the other. You know, when I came forward to the school board, it was really, I had been listening to Anne-Marie on the radio and reading her stuff for almost a year. So I had started to, you know, get concerned about this Common Core thing. And then this past September, when the school year started, chaos is too strong a word to use, but the start of the school year was very disorganized. We received paperwork. I have kids, I have 3 daughters in the school system right now, one in grade school, one in middle school, one in high school. And the materials that we were getting back were conflicting.
Really?
Yeah, we would get information from some teachers that would talk about policies that would conflict with information we got from other teachers in the same school. And
that's bizarre. I mean, is there any other name for that?
Well, it gets better. You know, we had my daughter is at Manchester Memorial, and something like 5 or 6 weeks into the school year, her algebra teacher went in to school, I think it was a Monday morning, and there was a stack of brand new algebra books on his desk, saying, "Here are your new books." And so for about a couple, I want to say a week or two, they were kind of in limbo. My daughter was in limbo. The teacher was in limbo. They weren't sure. Are we supposed to abandon? Am I supposed to abandon the lesson plan that I created and start using these books now? And while he was searching for answers, they were kind of on autopilot doing what they were doing. And then a determination was made. Yes, they're going to use the new books. And then we had the parent-teacher conference after that, and I spoke to him about it. And you know, he was, and I asked him. I said, "So what are you going to do? Do you have to throw out your whole lesson plan?" And you know, he was very reassuring, saying, "You know, look, yes, there are new textbooks. Yes, I'm going to have to readjust my lesson plan, but you know, don't worry. You know, we're going to teach the same stuff. Your daughter's going to learn algebra." And you know, I think reading between the lines, he was just saying, my life just got a heck of a lot more difficult, but I'm not going to let that affect your kid. And that was the message that I got, the implicit message that I got from a bunch of different teachers that I spoke with at the middle school level and at the high school level. There was a lot of shrugging of shoulders, a lot of rolling of eyeballs. And, you know, again, I felt for the teachers. You could see that they were between a rock and a hard place. You could see that they were, not all of them, but many of them were frustrated that they couldn't answer a lot of the questions that I was answering. And that's really, that was the origin of the testimony that I gave in front of the school board. It was obvious to me, obvious. None of the teachers knew what was going on, what was going to happen doing they did a very rushed adaptation over the summer to implement Common Core before the school board had even approved.
That's what I understand.
Yeah, the school board had not even taken it up, had not even approved implementing Common Core, yet the school administration decided to go ahead and do it. Spent a tremendous amount of time over the summer, from what I understand, teachers coming together, putting together lesson plans, you know, hastily assembling curricula, and it showed. It showed in September when the kids went in, mass confusion, one misunderstanding after another with my middle school daughter in her math class about, you know, what techniques she was supposed to be using, whether she was allowed to use them. You know, and on and on. And
I don't think that that's particularly strange, because just a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, now I do not have a child in the Bedford school system, but if I'm not mistaken, did not the principal of the Lergio school send out an email or a correspondence to every parent that not once mentioned the word Common Core, but did acknowledge that a lot of kids were having some issues and problems, but we'll get them fixed?
Yeah, I did see that letter. Parent had sent it to me. I don't know if that's Common Core related. It could be the everyday math. I mean, that alone will cause you math problems. I mean, that's what put tutors in business. That's what keeps Sylvan going in Bedford, is the fact that we have everyday math in the schools. So, you know, that alone, you know, there is an everyday math Common Core aligned book, too.
But no matter how you cut it,
yeah.
I mean, seriously, teachers have to be afraid to publicly speak out.
They are.
And I mean, administrators can say, oh, no, we welcome open comments and so on. Perhaps they do at staff meetings and such, I don't know. But I don't think that they particularly welcome if a bunch of teachers were to go give a newspaper interview and say, you know what, this is terrible. I don't think that that would enhance a teacher's reputation within the school system.
No, I hear from teachers all over the state that will not go public, but that have confided in me that you know, that they're very concerned. And you know, there were problems prior to Common Core, so I don't want to make it sound like Common Core is, you know, going to be this big problem.
But was there anything as sweeping as Common Core, that we're talking K through 12, like it or not?
Well, that's I had done an interview with the union leader a month or two ago, and the reporter brought that point up, and you know, he said, why now? You know, there have been problems with everyday math and, you know, No Child Left Behind. And I said, that's a good question. And I said, from my point of view, I think I look at this as an opportunity. You know, we haven't really had, that I can recall, at least in recent history, a point where you are addressing the entire system at one time. And what I mean by that is the standards, the curriculum, and the testing. That's all on the table right now, all at the same time. So I think it's, at the same time, it's a threat and it's an opportunity. I think there are serious shortcomings in Common Core. I think there are problems with the curricula and the companies that are developing these curricula. One of the things I tell, what we've done is we've put the fox in charge of the hen house. The same companies that are doing the assessments are developing study guides and school curricula. So if your job is to and textbooks, if your job is to publish textbooks, right?
Yeah.
What kind of strategy could you possibly employ to encourage school systems to have to update their textbooks and their study guides
it would
on a regular basis?
Very big conflict of interest.
You keep changing the assessment tests.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they have an incentive to constantly change things in order to score a profit, not to necessarily improve the quality of the education.
And yet Common Core advocates would say the new, what is it, Smarter Balance? Is that the correct?
Smarter Balance, yeah.
Assessments are the greatest thing since Wonderbird. Now, isn't that like a 400-point data system that's going to be gathering facts on students?
Right, that's one of the biggest contentions. And just to clarify, the data collection is separate from Common Core. The Common Core standards are one issue. The data points. I mean,
but they're married, aren't they?
Right. I think what we need to understand is that this is a redesigning of public education in America right now. And if you go to the U.S. Department of Education, if you just go to Google and you put redesign public education, U.S. Department of Education, you're going to bring up the U.S. Department of Education's webpage, and it explains how they want to redesign public education. The data collection, obviously, is one component. Common Core standards, competencies, what we have going on in the New Hampshire Public Schools is another topic. But the data collection is certainly a component that has raised concern, even amongst Common Core supporters, like Senator Markey in Massachusetts wrote a letter to Secretary Duncan stating his concern for all this data collection, all this information on students.
Now, some states have agreed to do the longitudinal studies that will give all kinds of personal information.
All states pretty much have set up a longitudinal database, and that creates a national database. When each state has a longitudinal database communicating with others, that creates a de facto national database.
Let me ask an internet expert right there.
Oh, yeah.
They claim that, oh, no problem. There'll be no sharing of information where it shouldn't go. As somebody who's an internet expert, tell me the guarantee on that.
Okay, well, two ways I can address that. First of all, one of the arguments that they will give you is that it is anonymized and aggregated. Okay, it has already been demonstrated. I don't remember the exact article, but somebody has already demonstrated that they can take that supposedly anonymized data and by marrying it with other data sets, they can identify something like 90–95%. They can identify a name with 90 to 95%.
Are you serious?
Yeah, just by cross-checking. I mean, there's so much information out there, publicly accessible information about people's personal information
and that doesn't even include the hacker activity.
Correct. Well, that was the second thing I was just going to mention was look no further than the Irs Scandal, the healthcare.gov website, the NSA wiretapping, and look with healthcare.gov. Look what's already happened. We've already had. I mean, the thing has been live for not even 2 months. You've already had instances of accidental releases of people's personal, medical, and financial information.
And do parents understand the impact? I mean, that information about their kids and personal information about their families, presumably can find its way around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's the world is getting to be such a complicated place. Yeah. It's really, I understand. I understand why people are finding it so hard to keep up with everything that's changing and just the complexity of it all. I mean, it's kind of what I do for a living. I keep track of all of this stuff and how quickly it's changing, and that's one of my jobs, is to inform my clients of, Google did another algorithm update last week. Here's what it means to you. Here's what you need to change. And, I've got a couple of clients right now.
I find that frightening. I mean, maybe I'm a total technological Luddite, but I find that scary.
I think, as a marketer, right, I deal with a lot of irrational fear about data collection.
I'm sure.
Okay,
yeah.
so I'm not one of these tinfoil hat wearing
no,
people
me neither. But still,
who's afraid of necessarily just afraid of all of this stuff. I think there are some misperceptions. There is data collection going on that is truly anonymized and truly, in my opinion, I don't want to say harmless, but not as it doesn't hold the potential for damage that other types do. For example, I mean, people are uptight. People, this always makes me smile, but people get uptight when a company like Amazon is keeping track of what products you've looked at, and they freak out when they look at something on Amazon and then they go into Facebook and they see an ad for a flashlight that they just looked at on Amazon.
Yeah.
So they come completely unhinged when they see something like that, but they're okay with the federal government keeping a cradle-to-grave dossier on their kids' education history, or having a complete train wreck of a misdesigned website like healthcare.gov, keeping their financial information, their insurance information, and their health history in an insecure, very hackable environment, and they're okay with the NSA tracking 100% of their emails and phone calls.
Although I do get calls from parents all the time. I got a call from a gentleman up in Guilford. His kids are taking a wellness class, and I know that these wellness classes are everywhere. And we're asked to take the survey. Very, very personal information that they were gathering on his children. And he is up in arms about it right now because of all of, where is this information going? I mean, where does it go? Who's getting this? Who's reading this? Is it anonymized? I mean, these are the things that you can't get answers on all the time. And if you don't know the answers, if you don't know, then I think it's best to be cautious.
I agree.
I agree. What John and Anne Marie were talking about brings up a number of words, I think big ideas. One is that we have to deal with authoritarianism. That's the creeping problem, a lot of what Anne Marie was saying. Then we have to deal with coercion, we have to deal with intimidation, and we have to deal with corruption. And that was brought up as well by, I think, John or Anne Marie. Look, at Pearson, you mentioned publisher, Pearson, who's the English publisher, who has just eaten up a lot of other publishers, has engaged in a lot of corrupt activities in order to dominate the field of materials in the Common Core. They have set up the Pearson Charitable Fund, which was they were just sued in court for I think it's $7.7 million that they have to pay out, which is basically nothing to them. It's like pocket change to me anyway, for them. But they have this charitable trust, which is a 501c3 organization, non-taxable, which they feed in money to develop materials that are going to be sold commercially. So it's a totally corrupt enterprise, and they are a major force behind the materials and the push into the Common Core. Things like that have to be discussed and brought out to people. The authoritarianism that Anne Marie has so described is a tremendous danger to us in our democracy and our way of life. Schools will have problems. They will always have problems. We are public. The public has problems. Congress has problems.
Yeah.
You
think?
The education of children, when, if you stand in a classroom and you have the responsibility of 20, 25 kids, their education for 180, 185 days a year, that is a tremendous responsibility that people simply have if you're not in that classroom, have a hard time understanding what the responsibility is like. To have outsiders who have never done this come and superimpose their values or ideas on those professionals, it is a dreadful place to be. I am sorry that teachers are not coming forward and doing things and coming forward and speaking up for the kids. That's a disappointment that
But unfortunately, the reality of life is they have to be afraid for their jobs.
Well, I don't think so.
You don't?
No. I don't think so. I think if you're coming forward and you're speaking truth to power, so to speak, you know, for example, demonstrate to me why, if I went up to I did this before the state board and they couldn't answer me, demonstrate to me why the standards that we had in New Hampshire are any less than the Common Core standards. Show me standard by standard which is better and why is it better. Nobody can answer that. There is no evidence to bring forward to tell us why we should go with the Common Core. This is a totally, there was no pilot programs. We don't know how it works. It was never evaluated. We didn't have any responsible educators who had experience come in and do a study of this. There's nothing. This was pushed on. You would never take your family to a hospital to get a procedure that had not been thoroughly tested.
No, I wouldn't.
No. But we're doing this to our children. And my beef also is that the teachers are not coming forward. A lot of this is because Gates has bought a lot of these things. He's bought the PTA. He has bought the NEA, the National Education Association. He has bought the union.
And just look at the NEA's website and look at the incredibly long list of comments from teachers outraged at the NEA's position and coming forward and saying, you don't speak for me.
Well, the NEA has not spoken.
Interesting.
You know, I was never a member of the NEA, so I never, even when I began teaching in the 1950s, I wouldn't, because I didn't trust them. And it's true, their position on the No Child Left Behind was dreadful. The PTA as well. They took a position of supporting No Child Left Behind. They're now supporting Common Core. Why? They have no evidence to support Common Core.
Okay.
But they got more than $1 million from Bill Gates.
I know. I mean, he's throwing money around like a drunken sailor.
But here's the thing. I've got PTA members, I've got teachers, I've got parents who are contacting me saying they want no part of Common Core. It's the leadership, it's the organization that has accepted the money, and so the leadership in the organization is collecting the money, and they're just taking a position, and yet the people in the trenches, the actual people doing the work, the people who look at this and dig deeper, like John said, you got to peel back the layers and really look at this and look at the materials that are being developed. I've got parents sending me example after example of, here's this math problem that is so confusing.
You have sent some to me, and I've been stunned.
It's terrible.
I have grandchildren that are in first grade, and I was speaking to my son today. He can't even understand what's coming home.
No.
One of the things I'd like to address is a lot of the criticism that people like I will get from pro-Common Core people is, well, you're not putting forth solutions. You're just being critical, and you'll hear that same criticism of Anne Marie and others, or or you're just an anarchist, or you're anti-government, or whatnot. And I've also gotten criticism directly for my testimony from people who are in the military, who their point of view is one of the reasons that they're in favor of Common Core is because they move around so much. And it's a legitimate concern that they have, right? They move from school system to school system, and they're constantly starting over, and there's no uniformity. And that's a legitimate concern that they have. However, the solution to that doesn't have to be a top-down government or Bill Gates type solution. In my bio, I am a leader in an organization called the International Society of Automation. This whole idea of developing standards has been around for a really long time. It happens in a lot of different industries, and in the organization that I belong to, that is one of the things that's one of our main charters. We have developed over the last 70 years hundreds and hundreds of standards for industrial automation. And it's not a top-down. It is a bottom-up, grassroots, volunteer effort that is very well coordinated. And this is something I would love to see the teachers in this country do that. Let the educators self-organize. It's 2013, soon to be 2014. The technology is out there to make it exceedingly simple to self-organize, develop these standards in a coordinated fashion, develop a consensus around the country. Let the teachers and the educators and the people who are qualified develop these standards on their own.
Right.
Well, I agree with you, but it has to be done locally, because what you develop here in Bedford, New Hampshire, would not necessarily go down someplace in New Mexico.
But is that true of? I can see that would be the case with curriculum, but would that be the same thing with standards?
Well, there are two different things. Standards are very tricky. I don't necessarily believe in. I think we all had. Look, when I started teaching in the 1950s, I had standards. These people who think they've developed the wheel again, you know, they've come forward. They've standards all of a sudden. That's nonsense. We all work with standards. We had standards. We had to meet standards. I believe in goals. I believe in goals because standards are very often developmentally inappropriate, what people say. So if you say, look, here is K through 3. Now, this is where I want third grade children to be, where I want them to be at the end of that 4-year period, K, 1, 2, 3. Then you take into account developmental problems, you take into account home problems, you take into account nutrition problems, you take into account a lot of other problems. But you have a 4-year span to take these little children and do something productive with them. But when you say in first grade, if you don't do this and this and this, you're a failure, then we're doing a tremendous disservice to kids. Then we're going counterproductive in what we should be doing in American education.
You know, I am looking at the clock, and I am absolutely amazed that we're down to less than 2 minutes because we haven't even gotten into the teacher evaluation costs or even talking about Mark Tucker and some, I will say, his wacko ways.
And he also couldn't teach in a classroom.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you said that. I would really like to, and I know, I mean, I'd be game to sit here and tape a second show right now, but I know that at least one of you, and I think all 3 of you, cannot do that. And I think there's somebody coming in right behind us in the studio for another show. Can we continue?
Sure.
Can we set, before we all, leave each other today, let's set a date and get another one in the can so it'll run right around the same time as this one?
I have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I can tell. And there's a lot of topics we didn't get to. And, I want to thank all 3 of you, particularly, we're a week before Christmas, so on top of all of your own responsibilities, you all have family things and holiday things and all that going on, too, so I want to thank you. But we will absolutely do another show, the 4 of us, because you've all made some phenomenal points, and an hour goes by awfully fast.
That's right.
So in closing, I really hope that you heard more about Common Core on this show. And as you can tell, right here today, we're going to be doing the 7th one. Never mind how many more we'll do all told. But, one thing that I want to get across to all of you who are watching this, listen to all the dialogue. Listen to all the noise that's going on, pro and con Common Core. Because one thing I've found out is the supporters of Common Core, they really need to point to actual truths and actual facts that show Common Core to be as valuable, needed, and superior as they say it is. And so far, all the arguments I'm hearing for Common Core have not received legitimate substantiation, a derogatory of educational experts who don't drink the Common Core Kool-Aid. They've provided an awful lot of misinformation. They haven't answered questions. And, how many times are we hearing it? And we're hearing it over and over. They attribute opposition to people who want to destroy public education. And with that, I will end the show by saying, what a load of bull. And that's telling it like it is. Come back for the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.